On that autumn morning, fallen leaves crunched under John Carter's worn boots as he crossed the yard, wrapped tightly in his heavy coat. The farm felt quiet, almost too quiet. The cold wind whistled through the bare branches of the trees, carrying with it an odd sense that something was about to change. John adjusted the scarf around his neck as he headed toward the barn to check on the horses before breakfast. It was a daily ritual, but that day, fate had other plans. As he pushed open the wooden door, a strange sound stopped him in his tracks. He frowned, standing still for a moment. At first, he thought it was the moan of an injured animal, but as the sound persisted, he realized it was something else. The sound was delicate, almost muffled, like the cries of babies. "What in the world?" he muttered, stepping cautiously inside. John's eyes adjusted to the dim light of the barn, and that's when he saw them. In the corner, atop a bale of hay, lay two tiny bundles. He approached slowly, dreading what he might find. When he got close enough to see clearly, his heart raced. They were two babies, twins, huddled together and whimpering softly. Their tiny faces were flushed from the cold, and they shivered, barely wrapped in thin blankets, as if someone had left them there in a hurry. "Emily!" he shouted, his voice echoing through the barn. There was no response. "Emily, get out here now." He didn't dare touch them yet, afraid he might hurt them, or worse, find out something was terribly wrong. As he waited for Emily, something on the ground caught his attention. Near one of the pillars, Daisy, his loyal dog, lay panting irregularly. Her fur was ruffled, and a streak of blood stained the ground around her front paw. Next to her lay the twisted body of a dead snake, its scales gleaming faintly in the weak light filtering through the barn's walls. "Daisy!" John exclaimed, dropping to his knees beside the dog. She raised her head weakly, letting out a faint whine as if trying to warn him. He realized she had fought to protect those babies. The weight of the situation hit him like a punch to the gut. "Emily!" he shouted again, this time with desperation in his voice. Inside the house, Emily heard the urgency in her husband's voice and dropped the coffee cup she was holding, running out the door. When she entered the barn, she found John kneeling, torn between looking at the babies and tending to Daisy. "My God, John, what's going on?" she asked, her wide eyes full of shock. "Daisy, she killed this snake, but she was bitten. And, Emily, there are two babies here." He pointed to the corner. "Someone left them in our barn." Emily covered her mouth with her hands, walking toward the children cautiously. When she saw them, emotion overwhelmed her. Who would do such a thing? "John, they're so small." John stood up. Urgency etched across his face. "We need blankets, milk, something. And Daisy, Emily, she's hurt badly. I don't know if she's going to make it." Emily nodded, tears already streaming down her face. "I'll take care of Daisy. Call Dr. Nelson. Bring the babies inside, for heaven's sake, John. We can't leave them out here." John carefully picked up the tiny bundles, as if they were made of glass. The babies cried louder for a moment, but the warmth of his arms seemed to soothe them. He carried them into the house, where he quickly made a makeshift bed of pillows and blankets on the couch. Emily was on the phone with the veterinarian as John warmed some milk and tried to feed the little ones with a spoon. Shortly afterward, Dr. Nelson arrived, a middle-aged man with a serious yet kind demeanor. He entered carrying his medical bag. "Where is she?" he asked, stepping inside. Emily led him to Daisy, who was lying on the rug near the fireplace, breathing heavily. Nelson knelt and examined the wound. She was bitten on the chest. The snake was venomous, probably a rattlesnake. "It was good you called me quickly, but the venom has spread." Emily dropped to her knees beside the veterinarian. "Please, Dr. Nelson, do something. Daisy is part of our family. She saved those babies." Nelson shook his head grimly. "I'll do everything I can, Emily, but prepare for the worst." As Nelson worked, John tried to calm the babies. One of them, a boy, had stopped crying and was staring at him with wide, curious eyes. "Hey there, little one," John murmured, his voice trembling. "You're lucky Daisy was out there. She saved your life, you know?" Emily returned to the living room and sat beside John, watching the baby silently. Who would do something like this? Leaving two children in the cold like that? John shook his head, unable to answer. Whoever it was must have thought it would be safe to leave them here. But why? Why didn't they knock on the door? Why didn't they ask for help? Before they could continue, Dr. Nelson entered the room, pulling off his surgical gloves with a heavy sigh. His silence said it all. "I'm sorry," he began, his voice full of compassion. Daisy was a fighter, but the venom was too quick. Emily collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. John wrapped an arm around her, trying to comfort her while also fighting back his own tears. "She died saving lives," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "She was a hero." Later that day, John and Emily buried Daisy beneath the large oak tree in the yard, where she loved to rest during the summer. The setting sun painted the sky orange and pink as they stood there for a long time, holding on to each other in silence. When they finally returned to the house, the babies were awake, their eyes shining in the soft light of the lamp. Emily picked up the little girl and looked at John. "They need us now. I don't know who left them here, but I already feel like they're ours." John nodded slowly, looking at the boy in his arms. "But who are they? And why?" "Someone trusted us to take care of them. We need to find out what happened." Emily looked at him, determination breaking through her tears. "We'll find out, John, and we'll give them whatever they need." As the babies finally drifted off to sleep, John and Emily sat at the kitchen table, exhausted but united in their new mission. The pain of losing Daisy still lingered, but a new purpose had begun to fill their hearts. Something larger than themselves had started, and the weight of it was impossible to ignore. The dawn arrived at the Carter farm like any other day, but the tension in the air was palpable. In the days following the discovery of the twins, John and Emily had fallen into an exhausting routine, tending to the basic needs of the children while trying to process the loss of Daisy. The nights were fragmented by cries, and the days consumed by bottles, makeshift diaper changes, and unanswered questions. That morning, Emily sat on the couch with the twins sleeping beside her, her eyes fixed on the blankets they had been wrapped in. The embroidery along the edges caught her attention again. Delicate little flowers, as if crafted with special care. "John," she called, breaking the silence. John, who was in the kitchen trying to warm milk, came into the living room with a furrowed brow. "What is it?" Emily held up the blanket, showcasing the embroidery. "Do you remember where you've seen this embroidery pattern before?" John leaned in to look, rubbing his beard thoughtfully. "No, it seems familiar, but I can't recall where." Emily sighed, her eyes filled with concern. "It's the same as the blanket I bought from Margaret last fall. Remember? She was going through hard times and started making these blankets to sell." John frowned deeper. "Margaret? The widow? The one who lives in the cabin at the end of the road?" "Yes," Emily confirmed, glancing at the babies. "John, what if she knows something? What if she's connected to this?" John hesitated, considering Emily's words. Margaret was a known figure in the community, though always reserved. Since her husband's death, she had lived alone with her daughter, Clara, a young woman who, though polite, always seemed weighed down by an inexplicable melancholy. "This is too serious to just ask without proof, Emily," he said gravely. "But maybe you're right. We need to find out more." Emily clutched the blanket closer, her eyes fixed on the twins. "Whoever left them here did so for a reason, and I need to know why." The next day, John decided to visit the local market, a place where conversations flowed as freely as commerce. He knew that if he wanted to learn something about Margaret without raising suspicion, this was the place to go. Emily stayed home with the twins, insisting he be discreet. At the market, John was greeted by the hum of voices and the familiar aroma of fresh fruit and baked bread. He walked down the central aisle, nodding greetings to acquaintances. But his focus was on Hank, a merchant who always seemed to know more about the locals than he should. "Hank," John called, stopping at the fruit stand. "How are you?" "John Carter." Hank's deep voice rang out cheerfully. "Good, good. And you?" "I heard things have been interesting over at your place." John forced a tight smile. "Let's just say it's been different. Listen, I was thinking about Margaret. You know, the widow at the end of the road. It's been a while since I've seen her. Has she been around?" Hank raised an eyebrow, though he didn't seem suspicious. "Ah, Margaret. Yeah, she was here a few days ago. She was with her daughter, Clara. I saw them carrying something big, covered with a blanket. It was odd, to be honest. They seemed to be in a hurry." John kept his tone casual. "Do you know where they were headed?" Hank scratched his beard. "Not exactly, now that you mention it. I saw them heading down the road that leads to your farm." He paused, leaning toward John. "Why do you ask? Is something wrong?" John quickly shook his head. "No, nothing serious. Just curious. It's been a while since we saw her, and Emily mentioned something about her blankets." Hank nodded, polishing an apple. "She still makes those beautiful embroideries. But I'll tell you, Clara seemed different. Nervous, maybe? I don't know. It just felt like they were hiding something." John thanked Hank and left, his mind racing. The behavior Hank described aligned perfectly with Emily's suspicions. He returned home determined to confront Margaret, but knew he needed Emily's help to approach the matter delicately. When John got home, he found Emily cradling the twins, murmuring softly to soothe them. She looked up as he entered, her expression shifting instantly as she noticed the seriousness on his face. "Did you find out anything?" she asked anxiously. John recounted his conversation with Hank, detailing Margaret and Clara's odd behavior. When he finished, Emily frowned, her eyes returning to the blanket. "This doesn't prove anything," she said, though her voice betrayed her unease. "But we need the truth, John. If Margaret or Clara knows something, they have to tell us." John nodded. "But we need to be careful. We can't accuse them without solid proof. If they're not involved, this could be a huge mistake." Emily glanced at the sleeping twins. "We'll go tomorrow. Once the babies are fed and asleep, I'll ask the neighbor to watch them while we visit Margaret. I can't let this doubt consume us." John agreed, though tension weighed heavily on his shoulders. The night was long, with both taking turns caring for the babies as uncertainty hung over them like a dark cloud. The next morning, John and Emily set out early from Margaret's house. The path was short but felt endless due to their anxiety. Margaret's cabin was surrounded by a small garden, where she spent most of her time tending to plants. As they approached, they saw Margaret kneeling in the dirt, pulling weeds. When she noticed their presence, she stood quickly, wiping her hands on her apron. "John, Emily," she said warmly. "What a nice surprise. What brings you here?" John and Emily exchanged a brief glance before Emily responded. "Margaret, can we talk? It's something important." Margaret hesitated, her smile fading slightly, but she nodded. "Of course. Come in, please." Inside the cabin, the earthy scent was even stronger, and John noticed a few blankets on a table by the window. Each had the same embroidery pattern he recognized so well. Emily started cautiously. "Margaret, a few days ago, we found 2 babies in our barn." Margaret's eyes widened, her expression of surprise seeming genuine. "Babies? In your barn?" "Yes," Emily confirmed. "They were wrapped in blankets with the same embroidery you make. That's why we came here. We need to know if you know anything." Margaret looked away, her breathing visibly heavier. John leaned forward, his voice firm but not hostile. "Margaret, if you know something, you need to tell us. We're just trying to understand what's going on." The widow remained silent for a long moment before finally sighing deeply. "You might need to talk to Clara," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Emily's heart raced, and John clenched his fists at his sides. They were closer to the truth, but what would it reveal? Margaret averted her gaze again, her trembling fingers clutching her apron as if it could help her gather her thoughts. Emily and John waited, holding their breath as the silence between them grew heavier with each passing second. Finally, Margaret let out a deep sigh, like someone about to confess a long-held secret. "Clara," Margaret's voice faltered and she tried again. "Clara is the one who can answer your questions. I need to call her." Before Emily or John could react, Margaret was already moving, disappearing through a narrow door that led to a small room at the back of the house. The muffled sound of footsteps and a faint murmur echoed, but the conversation was too indistinct to make out. Emily looked at John, the tension evident on her face. He pressed his lips together and gave a slight nod, as if urging her to remain patient. Moments later, Margaret returned, with Clara by her side. The young woman kept her eyes downcast, her shoulders slumped as if she were trying to shrink into herself. Her light brown hair was tied in a messy bun, and dark circles under her eyes hinted at sleepless nights. Clara looked both frightened and confused, but Margaret gave her a gentle nudge to encourage her to step forward. "Clara, dear, they know," Margaret said carefully. "They know about the babies." Clara froze in place, her wide eyes suddenly seeking Margaret's. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but closed it again, trembling slightly. Emily stepped forward, her voice kind but firm, easing the tense atmosphere. "Clara, it's okay," she said, with assurance but without accusation. "We just want to understand. We only want to know the truth." It took Clara a few seconds to respond. When she finally did, her voice was a fragile whisper. I didn't know what to do." John crossed his arms, concern mixing with confusion on his face. "What do you mean by that, Clara? Was it you and Margaret who left the babies in our barn?" Clara looked at the floor, but slowly nodded. Margaret placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder, as if trying to provide support, though her own eyes glistened with unshed tears. She was the first to speak. "It was my idea, John, Emily. Clara got pregnant, and we didn't know what to do. No one knew. She hid it from everyone, even me, for months." Margaret swallowed hard, her voice thick with the weight of her confession. "When the babies were born, we realized we couldn't raise them here. We don't have the resources or the support." Clara interrupted, her voice heavy with guilt. "I didn't want them to grow up like this, alone with no future. And you're such good people. I always heard how much you wanted children. I thought they'd have a chance with you." The silence that followed was almost deafening. Emily blinked rapidly, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. John remained motionless, his eyes fixed on Clara as if trying to process everything she was saying. "Then you decided to use us as a solution?" John asked, his voice low but brimming with restrained emotion. "Without telling us anything? Without giving us a chance to decide for ourselves?" Margaret stepped forward, her voice hurried. "John, Emily, please understand. We didn't know what else to do. I was afraid that if we told you, you would reject the idea, that you would judge us. So, we made a decision. I know it was wrong not to tell you earlier, but all we wanted was the best for those children." Emily looked at Clara, her tone softer now. "Clara, you left us completely in the dark. If anything had happened to them, you trusted that we would do the right thing, but you never gave us a choice. Why didn't you come to us?" Clara began to cry, tears streaming silently down her face as she clenched her hands into her apron. "I was scared that you wouldn't want them, scared that no one would want them, scared that I would be a terrible mother. I knew you could give them everything I couldn't." The intensity of the confession was like a blow to Emily's heart, and she wiped away a tear before speaking. "We need more answers, Clara. Who is the father of these children? Does he know about them?" Clara's eyes widened again, but she said nothing. Margaret quickly intervened, her voice firmer this time. It doesn't matter who the father is. He's not in their lives and never will be. That's not true, John exclaimed, his patience wearing thin. If he finds out, there could be legal implications. This could change everything. We need to know. Clara shook her head desperately. No, please. He can't know. I promised I would never tell anyone. He can't be involved. Margaret gripped Clara's shoulder, whispering something in her ear. After a moment, Clara took a deep breath and murmured, I just wanted them to be happy. I just wanted them to have a chance at a better life. Emily, sensing the raw pain in Clara's voice, gently placed a hand on her arm. And they will. We will care for them. But Clara, if we're going to do this, we need all the information. We need to trust each other. Clara nodded hesitantly. But before she could respond, Margaret stepped forward again. Give her time. Please. This is already so much to process. I promise we'll talk more. Just, please don't take this away from her. She only wanted the best. John sighed deeply, his shoulders tense as he looked at Emily. He knew the conversation wasn't over. But for now, it was clear that no one was willing to reveal more. They said their goodbyes, promising to return, and left the cabin with more questions than answers. On the way home, the silence between John and Emily was heavy. When they arrived and saw the twins, both knew their lives were irrevocably changing. But the mystery still hung over them, like a storm brewing on the horizon. The afternoon was waning, tinting the sky a shade of orange that contrasted with the tension at the Carter farm. Emily was sitting on the couch, gently rocking the makeshift crib where the twins slept. John entered the room silently, carrying 2 cups of tea. He handed one to Emily and sat beside her, letting out a deep sigh. Is she still out there? Emily asked, referring to Clara, who had arrived unannounced and, after another interrupted and hesitant conversation, had gone outside for some fresh air. She is, John replied, his eyes fixed on the steam rising from his cup. But you saw how she was Emily. She didn't come here just to check on the babies. Something is eating her up inside. Emily nodded. She needs help, and we need answers. Minutes later, Clara came back into the house. Her eyes were swollen, as if she had been crying silently. She sat at the table uninvited, and John and Emily followed, sitting across from her. Clara, you know we're not here to judge you, Emily began, trying to ease the tension. But we need to understand the whole truth. Not for us, but for these babies. Clara looked at her hands, her fingers interlocked and trembling. I know, she murmured, her voice barely audible. John leaned forward. Clara, it's time. You can't keep this to yourself anymore. Who is the father? The silence that followed was suffocating. Clara took a deep breath, as if preparing to dive into deep waters. When she finally lifted her head, her eyes locked with Emily's. It's William Harper, she said, her voice trembling. Emily gasped, and John felt his stomach turn. For God's sake, John exclaimed, running his hands desperately through his hair. He knew William as everyone in the region did. The most powerful and influential man for miles, owning lands that stretched as far as the eye could see. A ruthless businessman, but always presenting a respectable facade, especially because of his wife, known for her charitable work. John was the first to recover his voice. William Harper? How did this happen, Clara? Clara looked at him with tear-filled eyes. I worked as a cleaner at his house. It was an occasional job, but it helped me earn enough to support my mother. He was always polite, but after a while, things changed. Emily felt a pang in her chest, seeing the pain on Clara's face. Change how? Clara hesitated but continued, her voice thick with emotion. He started saying things. Made me feel like I was special, like he cared about me. I was foolish. I thought he really cared. And when you got pregnant, John asked, trying to stay calm, though the tension in his voice was evident. I never told him, Clara replied quickly, shaking her head. I knew that if I did, he would deny it. He'd accuse me of lying or worse. He's a married man with a reputation to protect. I couldn't risk confronting him. John took a deep breath, rubbing his forehead. So he doesn't know about the babies, about any of this? Clara nodded. No, I just stopped accepting occasional jobs and never went back there. And I wanted to stay that way. He can't know. Emily leaned forward, holding Clara's hand. What are you afraid of, Clara? That he'll hurt you? That he'll take the babies from us? Clara looked at Emily, her eyes glistening with tears. Of everything, William Harper has enough power to ruin anyone. If he finds out, he could use this against me, against you, against these babies. He'd destroy my reputation. I'd be the liar, the homewrecker. John closed his eyes for a moment, trying to calm the anger rising within him. He had no direct dealings with William Harper, but knowing that this man had been responsible, even indirectly, for so much pain made his blood boil. Emily squeezed Clara's hand tighter. Clara, listen. You did what you thought was best for your children, and we understand that. But keeping this secret won't protect anyone in the long run. You need to think about what's right for them. I've already thought about it, Clara cried, her voice filled with desperation. I've thought about every possibility, every scenario. And the best thing for them is to stay with you, far away from William. You can give them a life I never could. John finally spoke, his voice firm. Clara, we've promised to care for them, and we will. But you need to trust us. If William is a threat, we need to be prepared to face him. Clara lowered her head, her shoulders shaking as she sobbed. Emily stood and wrapped Clara in a tight embrace, trying to convey comfort amidst the chaos. I trust you, Clara murmured through her tears. But please, don't let him find out. Promise me you'll protect them. Emily looked at John, and they both nodded. We will protect them, Clara, Emily said firmly. But you also need to be strong. This won't be easy for anyone. When Clara finally left, the night had fallen, and the twins were beginning to cry in the next room. Emily and John sat in silence for a long moment before Emily stood to tend to the babies. This isn't going to end here, John said, more to himself than to Emily. I know, she replied, cradling one of the babies in her arms. But for now, we need to focus on them. They need us. John looked at the tiny, innocent faces and felt the weight of responsibility settle over him like never before. As long as William Harper remained in the dark, the secret was safe. But both knew that secrets don't stay hidden forever. The decision to tell William Harper everything felt like carrying a massive burden uphill. Claire resisted as long as she could, but Emily's insistence was unshakable. Deep down, Claire knew the secret couldn't remain hidden forever, and despite her overwhelming fear, she understood that she needed to face the truth for the sake of the twins and everyone involved. It was a cold afternoon when Clara finally agreed to a meeting. The encounter would take place at Clara's house, away from the prying eyes of the community. Emily, concerned about Clara's vulnerability, decided that she and John would be nearby, but would give Clara space to confront William on her own. William Harper's car arrived punctually, kicking up dust along the road to Clara's modest home. The man stepped out impeccably dressed, as if heading to a business meeting. His poise and controlled demeanor reflected his reputation perfectly. The wealthiest landowner in the region, accustomed to having everything under his control. Clara was waiting in the living room, her sweaty hands clenched tightly in her lap. When she heard William's footsteps on the porch, her heart raced wildly. Margaret, watching nervously from the kitchen, knew she couldn't intervene, but felt her own anxiety grow. As William entered, Clara stood, her legs trembling slightly. Clara. William greeted her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. What's so urgent that it couldn't wait? She took a deep breath, gesturing toward the chair across from her. Please, sit down. I need to talk to you. William hesitated for a moment, clearly uneasy with the serious tone. He sat, crossing his legs and adjusting his watch. "So, what's going on?" Clara remained still, staring at him as if searching for courage in his gaze. But she found none. She looked away, biting her lower lip. I never wanted this to happen, but you need to know." "Clara," William said impatiently, leaning forward. "Be direct. I don't have much time." His words were the push Clara needed. "I'm talking about the babies. The twins." The silence in the room was almost suffocating. William blinked slowly, his expression shifting from impatience to disbelief. "The twins? What are you talking about?" "They're your children," Clara said, her voice trembling but firm. "The twins I left with the Carters. They're yours, William." For a moment, William didn't react. He simply stared at her, as if the words didn't make sense. Then, slowly, he leaned back in the chair, crossing his arms. "That's ridiculous." "It's not ridiculous," Clara countered, her emotions rising in her throat. "You know we had a relationship. You know this is possible." "Clara," he said, incredulity and disdain dripping from his voice. "You're telling me that after months, you've come out of nowhere to throw this in my face? What do you think my wife would say? Do you think I'll risk everything for this?" The word he didn't say hung heavier in the air than if he had spoken it aloud. Clara blinked, tears welling in her eyes, but she refused to break. "I'm not asking you to risk anything, William. I'm telling you that you have a responsibility. These babies are yours." William ran a hand through his hair, visibly shaken. "And what do you expect me to do? Leave my wife? My marriage? You know that's impossible." Clara clenched her fists, tears now streaming silently down her face. "I'm not expecting any of that. I just want you to acknowledge that they exist. They are your children, William." William shook his head, letting out a humorless laugh. "You think I'm going to throw everything away over a mistake? No, Clara, that's not going to happen." "Then what do you suggest?" Clara asked, her voice a mixture of frustration and despair. "I've handled this alone for months. I did what I thought was best for them. But you need to do your part." He remained silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the table between them. Finally, he spoke, his voice cold and calculated. "I can help financially. Whatever the Carters need to raise these babies, I'll take care of it. But that's it. I don't want contact. I don't want my name tied to this." Clara's eyes widened, a knot forming in her throat. "Money? Is that all they mean to you? Just money?" "Clara," he said firmly, "I can't be involved more than this. My marriage wouldn't survive. My reputation would be destroyed. But they'll have everything they need. That's more than fair." Clara wanted to scream. She wanted to throw him out of the house, to make him feel the pain she had carried for months. But deep down, she knew she was expecting something he was incapable of giving. She swallowed her anger, feeling defeated. "Fine," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "If that's all you can do, then do it. But know that they will never know who you are. And God help me, William. I hope they never feel the emptiness you're leaving in them right now." William looked uncomfortable at her words but didn't respond. He stood, adjusting his jacket as if it was a final task he needed to complete to close the matter. "Clara, you know how to reach me if you need anything practical. But I think this settles everything for now." He spoke as he signed a check and left it on the table. Clara remained seated as he left, the sound of his footsteps echoing on the porch before the car engine started and faded into the distance. She buried her head in her hands, the weight of the moment crushing her. Margaret entered silently, sitting beside her and placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "He's not going to step up, is he?" Margaret asked softly. Clara shook her head, sobbing. "No, but he'll give money. As if that's enough. As if they're just a problem he can pay to disappear." Margaret squeezed Clara's shoulder but said nothing. She knew words would be useless in that moment. They sat there in silence as Clara processed what she had lost. Once again, at the Carter farm that same night, John and Emily were discussing William's offer. Emily held a piece of paper outlining the terms of the financial arrangement, her hands trembling slightly. "I don't want his money," John said firmly. "We don't need it, John," Emily replied, her voice weary. "This isn't about us. It's about them. If this ensures they have everything they need, we can't refuse." John pressed his lips together but knew she was right. He looked at the two babies, sleeping peacefully, and felt the weight of the world settle on his shoulders. "Fine," he said finally, "but that doesn't mean he's part of their lives. He never will be." Emily nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. "They'll have enough love here. They don't need anything else." Still, the void left by William's rejection loomed over them, like a shadow no one could shake. Winter arrived with full force at the Carter farm, bringing with it a stillness that contrasted with the silent storm brewing around them. After days of tense discussions and sleepless nights, John and Emily finally decided to accept William Harper's offer. The money he provided wouldn't ease their conscience, but it would ensure the twins had everything they needed to grow up safely and comfortably. Yet the weight of the secret began to seep into every aspect of their lives. Margaret and Clara, now visiting the farm more frequently, were helpful and attentive. Clara assisted Emily with the endless diaper changes and bottle feedings, while Margaret used her sewing talents to make warm clothes for the babies. Despite the apparent harmony, the tension among the four was palpable. There were unspoken words and exchanged glances that carried an undeniable weight. It was during these visits that the rumor began to take shape. In the small community surrounding the Carter farm, no one remained unaware of others' lives for long. Margaret and Clara's frequent visits didn't go unnoticed, especially by Tom Willis, an employee at William Harper's estate who lived in a cabin near Margaret's property. A naturally suspicious man, always alert to his surroundings, it didn't take long for Tom to start connecting the dots. The night William visited Margaret to discuss the arrangement, Tom, standing outside his cabin, noticed the lights at the widow's house still on, unusual for that hour. He approached discreetly and saw his employer, William Harper, entering Margaret's house. His mind immediately began to race. "What's Mr. Harper doing at Widow Margaret's house at this hour?" he murmured to himself, frowning. The next day, he remembered that Clara had stopped working at William's house months ago, where she had done occasional cleaning jobs. Instead, she was now often seen at the Carter farm, carrying supplies and other packages. Everyone knew about the twins. 2 children left in the Carter's barn wasn't a secret anymore. Tom realized something was happening, something no one wanted to be discovered. At the Carter farm, Emily felt the weight of the secret grow heavier each day. The kind smiles of Clara and Margaret, once comforting, now seemed accompanied by looks that concealed more than they revealed. One afternoon, while the two were helping with the babies, Emily, unable to contain her concern, decided to confront them. "Do you think this will last forever?" she asked as Clara rocked one of the twins. Her voice was low, but charged with emotion. Margaret paused folding clothes and looked at Emily, puzzled. "What do you mean, dear?" Emily sighed, glancing at John, who was outside chopping wood. "The secret, all of this, the frequent visits, the excuses, the money we accepted. Do you think no one will notice?" Clara averted her eyes, clearly uncomfortable. Margaret tried to sound confident. "We did what was necessary to protect these babies. Who would find out?" Emily bit her lip, holding back a wave of frustration. "People talk, Margaret. I've already heard comments at the market. Everyone is wondering why you visit so often. I've even heard that Tom Willis, William's employee, is asking about you and the twins. He saw William enter your house that night." Clara turned pale. "He saw. Are you sure?" Emily nodded, worry evident in her expression. "He's not the kind of man to let things slide. And you know how rumors spread around here. If he starts talking, we could lose control of everything." Margaret pressed her lips together, sitting in the nearest chair. I knew this was risky, but we didn't have a choice, Emily. We did this for the babies. We have to stay strong. But at what cost? Emily whispered, looking at the twins' small, innocent faces. I'd do anything for them. But sometimes I wonder if we're building a house of cards that's bound to collapse. Clara began crying silently, and Margaret placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. We'll figure this out, Clara. We can't let the past destroy their future. Meanwhile, Tom Willis began to spread his suspicions among the neighbors. He spoke in a tone of curiosity, but his words were loaded with insinuations. Have you noticed how often Margaret and Clara have been going to the Carter farm? And why did Mr. Harper visit Margaret that night? He would say during conversations at the local market. The rumors began to circulate rapidly. Some residents speculated that Clara had a closer relationship with the Carters than she admitted. Others questioned why William Harper was involved. Gradually, the twins' names started coming up in conversations, as if they were the missing piece of the puzzle. John, who rarely got involved in community matters, heard the rumors when he went to the market. He returned home with a somber expression, and Emily knew immediately that something was wrong. They are talking, Emily. They are starting to put the pieces together. John placed the packages on the table, rubbing his face with his hands. I don't know how long we can keep this up. Emily felt a lump in her throat. What are they saying? Everything, from Clara and Margaret's visits to the night William was seen at Margaret's house. They are speculating about the twins. It won't be long before someone connects all the dots. Emily held John's hand, trying to convey strength. We knew this would be hard, but we must stay strong. For them, John looked at the twins, who were innocently playing on the living room floor. He nodded, but the shadow of worry on his face did not disappear. That night, as the farm fell silent, John and Emily sat side by side on the porch, gazing at the starry sky. The night's chill seemed to reflect the unease in their hearts. We're on a tightrope, Emily, John finally said. One wrong step, and this could all come crashing down. Emily rested her head on his shoulder, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. But for them, it's worth it. Whatever the price, we'll pay it. As they remained there, wrapped in a disquieting silence, the feeling that the secret was about to explode hung over them like an approaching storm. The tension in the community had turned into a storm of whispers and furtive glances. Every neighbor seemed to know a piece of the story, but no one had the courage to confirm the details. This tense calm was broken when the rumors finally reached the ears of Ann Harper, William's wife. It was on a Sunday morning, after Mass, that Ann, surrounded by acquaintances as she left the church, heard the first clear insinuations. It's a real shame. And to think that William Harper, the pillar of our community, said one of the women, stopping as Ann approached. Ann frowned. A pillar of our community. What? What are you talking about? The women exchanged looks, clearly uncomfortable, until one of them, bolder than the others, broke the silence. And I don't mean to intrude, but haven't you heard anything about William and Clara? Clara's name made Ann's stomach twist. What exactly do you think you know? More whispering, more exchanged glances, until another woman murmured, They're saying that the twins the Carters are raising are his children, and that Clara left them there, and stood still. The information hit her like a blow, yet her expression remained firm. She took a deep breath and raised her chin. That's absurd, she replied, before heading quickly to the car that was waiting for her. But the seed of doubt had already been planted, and was a woman with a strong presence, known for her impeccable bearing and her dedication to charitable works. Until then, her life seemed like a perfect portrait of stability and prestige. However, upon hearing hints of a connection between her husband, the twins, and Clara, Ann knew she had to act. That evening, the Harper mansion was silent, except for the sound of Ann's determined footsteps in the hallway. She found William in his study, a glass of brandy in his hand, flipping absent-mindedly through a book. William, her voice was firm. leaving no room for evasions. He looked up, surprised by her tone. And what happened? She closed the door behind her, crossing her arms. I want the truth, William. No beating around the bush. There are rumors everywhere. And if I am the last to know, you had better start talking now. William frowned, setting the glass down on the table. Rumors? What kind of rumors? Rumors of all kinds, from the church and even the crochet club. Rumors that you were at Margaret's house. That Clara no longer works here because she's involved in something, and that it has to do with those twins the Carters are raising. And took a step forward, her voice rising. Are they your children, William? The room fell silent. William looked away, his breathing growing heavier. He knew denying it would be useless, and the weight of the truth finally caught up with him. And listen to me, he began, but she cut him off. No, I want the truth, William. No lies, no excuses. Her eyes were filled with tears, but her posture was as rigid as stone. William sighed, running a hand through his hair. Yes, they are my children. The impact of his confession hit like a punch, and staggered slightly, holding on to the nearest chair. How could you? She whispered, her voice breaking. After everything we built together, how could you betray our family like this? And I made a mistake, he said, standing up. But I fixed it. They're with the Carters. Well taken care of. There's no need for this to ruin our lives. Fixed it? She repeated, laughing without humor. You think you can just throw money at this and expect it all to disappear? These are lives, William. And what about ours? What about my dignity? I did what I thought was best, he said defensively. I didn't know about the pregnancy, and when I found out, it was already too late. They're not part of my life, and she looked at him in disgust. But they exist, William, and now everyone knows. Everyone in this damn community is talking about it. You've ruined everything, and left the study without waiting for a response, leaving William alone with his guilt. Meanwhile, at the Carter farm, John and Emily were facing their own judgment. The rumors had turned into a hurricane of poisonous comments, and neighbors who once greeted them with smiles now looked at them with suspicion. I knew something was off, said one of the townspeople at the market. They have no children, no relatives around here, and suddenly they appear with twins? That's not normal. And Margaret and Clara always going there, another added. There's definitely something wrong with that. Emily heard the whispers as she bought bread, her face flushing with shame and anger. When she got home, she found John on the porch, staring at the horizon with a dark expression. They're talking, John, she said, holding the bread bag as if it were a shield. They're talking about the twins. About us. I know, he answered, his jaw tense. But we knew this would happen. We have to face it. And how are we going to do that? Emily asked, tears welling up in her eyes. They're judging us for something they don't understand. They think we're covering up wrongdoing and betrayals, which, in a way, isn't entirely untrue. John took her hand. We'll do it together. We don't owe anyone an explanation, but we'll protect these babies. They're our family now. The community finally got the confirmation it was looking for when Clara decided to tell the truth. During a meeting at the local church, where the residents often discuss regional matters, Clara stood up, her hands trembling, and asked to speak. All eyes turned to her, and the silence was so heavy it could have been cut with a knife. I need to say something. Her voice shook, but she continued. The twins that the Carters are raising. They are my children. A murmur spread through the room, but Clara raised her hand, asking for silence. I left them there because I knew they could give them a better life than I ever could. I know it was wrong to hide this, but I did what I thought was right for them. Her words echoed through the room, stirring surprise, anger, and, in some faces, compassion. Margaret stood beside Clara, holding her hand for support. And William Harper is the father, Clara added, her voice breaking. He did not know about the pregnancy, but he knows now. He agreed to help us financially, but I want to make it clear that the decision was mine. I did it for my children. The silence that followed was interrupted by whispers and shocked looks. Some condemned Clara, others showed sympathy, but the truth was finally exposed, and the storm had fully broken loose. William, pressured by the community's reaction and Anne's anger, tried to repair the damage. He increased the financial support for the Carters, but severed all ties with Clara and the twins. And in a final attempt to save their marriage, demanded that he never again have contact with them, and William reluctantly agreed. At the Carter farm, John and Emily held the twins even closer, facing the public judgment with courage. They knew that the rumors and reproachful looks would not disappear easily, but they were determined to raise the twins with love and security. Clara continued to visit them, though now more discreetly. She knew that her presence could bring complications as the children grew, and she did not want to interfere with the upbringing the couple would give them. She also knew that the Carters were the best thing that could have happened to her children. And despite everything, there was relief in having no more secrets. A light spring breeze drifted through the fields surrounding the Carter farm, carrying the fresh scent of newly bloomed flowers. The property was more vibrant than ever, full of life and cheerful sounds. In the backyard, two children played under the shade of the large oak tree. Beneath that same tree, they had created a small garden in honor of Daisy, the dog who saved their lives by killing a venomous snake. She was buried there. They had grown up hearing that story from their adoptive parents. In that backyard, they spent many happy moments. "Sarah, that's not fair," shouted Ben, trying to catch his sister, who was running with a mischievous smile, holding a colorful kite. "You have to be faster, Ben," she teased, throwing her head back and laughing. John, who was working on the porch fixing a chair, looked up and smiled at the scene. He wiped his hands on his jeans and turned to Emily, who was making lemonade in a glass pitcher. "They never get tired, do they?" he said, shaking his head with a tender expression. Emily laughed softly, placing the pitcher on the table beside two glasses. "No, and I hope they never do. Hearing them laugh is the most beautiful sound in the world." John came closer, wrapping his arms around his wife. "And to think that 8 years ago we did not know what would become of us." Emily sighed, leaning back against him. "And look at us now. I would not trade this for anything." Life in the years following the scandal had been full of ups and downs, but the love John and Emily felt for the twins was greater than any judgment they faced. The community, which initially looked at them with distrust, gradually accepted the new family dynamic. Part of this was due to how John and Emily handled everything, with their heads held high in a determination that silenced even the harshest critics. Margaret remained a constant presence in the family's life. She often showed up with fresh cakes or handmade blankets, always offering gentle, warm help. Clara, in turn, chose a more discreet approach. She visited the twins occasionally, preferring to keep a respectful distance, but her love for them was evident in every smile and in every emotional look she gave them. It was on one such afternoon that Clara arrived at the farm, bringing a small gift for the children. Ben and Sarah ran to her, their faces lit with joy. "Aunt Clara!" they exclaimed in unison, hugging her tightly. Clara laughed, kneeling down to their height. "Hello, my darlings. I have something for you." She gave Ben a small wooden truck and Sarah a cloth doll, both handmade. The children's eyes shone, and they started to play immediately, leaving Clara with John and Emily. "You always know how to make them happy," Emily said, offering Clara a glass of lemonade. Clara accepted, sitting on the porch next to Margaret, who was already there. "They are amazing. I am always so proud when I see them like this." Margaret, watching the grandchildren play, sighed. "They are a miracle, and all of this is thanks to you both." "It is not just us," John said, sitting down next to Emily. "They have many people who love them. That is what matters." Clara hesitated for a moment before speaking, her voice filled with emotion. "I wish I had been more present, but I did not want to make things even more complicated." You have always been the best parents they could have. Emily took Clara's hand, squeezing it firmly, and you will always be part of their lives. They know who you are. I have told them since they were little. And even though to them I am the mother, they know you are like a second mother, and that will never change. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled, relieved by the acceptance she always found at the Carter farm. As for William, his presence in the community had become increasingly scarce. After the scandal, his influence diminished, and he chose a more discreet life. He kept his promise of financial support, but stayed away, as and demanded. The Harper farm, once a symbol of power and prestige, was now regarded with a mixture of curiosity and disapproval. One afternoon, while organizing the newly arrived mail, Emily found an envelope sent by William. Inside was a check and a brief letter. John and Emily, I remain committed to ensuring that Ben and Sarah have everything they need. I know I will never be able to fix the mistakes of the past, but I am grateful for everything you do for them. William Harper. Emily showed the letter to John, who read it silently before putting it away in a drawer. He does not need to say anything else, John said. The twins have what they need. We give it to them. Time passed, and the love surrounding the Carter farm only grew. Ben and Sarah, now 11 years old, were happy, energetic children, always exploring the fields and filling the house with laughter. The nights were filled with stories told by John, while Emily sewed by lamplight. On one of those nights, Ben, his eyes shining with curiosity, asked, "Mom, why does everyone say our home is so special?" Emily smiled, setting the needle aside. She looked at John, who nodded and answered, "Because this home is made of love, my dear, and nothing in the world is stronger than that." Ben seemed satisfied with the answer, lying down next to Sarah, who was already asleep. As John and Emily looked at their children, their hearts filled with gratitude. The storm had passed, and although the scars still existed, the family they had built was a constant reminder that love, even in the midst of hardship, has the power to transform everything.